Here we're going to repot some typical Venus flytraps like you'd find in pretty much any nursery. Usually they've got them in a little plastic box. We're going to put these up in 3-inch pots, and we're going to use them for our plant light comparison because I really don't want to risk any of my valuable Venus flytraps. But I'm going to show you too, as we repot these, it's also a good time to look at the rhizome and see if it's worth separating, since these are pretty full into these pots. Or also you can do leaf pulls, and I'll show you how to do a leaf pull so that you can grow a new plant off of a leaf. Usually what happens when you do this is it's going to trigger all the traps, so a lot of times the plant won't do very well for a little bit after you do that, because it takes energy to trip those traps, and if there's no food in there when they do it, it's just going to cost them energy. So what I've done is, to get prepared, I've got my main soil media mix. It's a typical mix of peat, perlite, and sand. I've added to it some chopped up sphagnum moss, dried sphagnum moss, just to get a little more airy for these guys. They seem to like a little bit airier soil. This is top dressing. I don't like to see the perlite sticking up, so this is just peat and sand. Both of these are pretty wet and sloppy, which helps them go into the pot easier. This is the sphagnum moss that we're using. Just take a little bit, put it in the bottom of the pot, and then you want to make sure you've got all the holes covered. I need a little teeny tiny bit more. Need that big branch. But get that in the bottom, covers the holes, keeps the soil from coming out. We're not going to put soil in these yet, because we'll wait till we start putting the plant in, so we can make sure the roots are down in the medium. I've also prepared, since we're going to be doing leaf pulls or possibly rhizome divisions, I've already prepared some pots. These will be good to get all of our leaf pulls in. We can separate them out later. But what I've done is I'm going to name these plants, because you never know when you might find an interesting cultivar that you want to play around with and try and propagate more. So I'm going to name these. I've got 5 of them. They're just typical 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And that way we'll be able to remember, when these start growing plants, which mother plant they came from. And that way, if we come up with something interesting, or if we do a cross and it comes out cool and we want to do it again, we'll know which plants, which of these are related to which of those. So it's not necessary, certainly, but it's just something I'm going to do just to kind of keep track. My spoon for the media. Now let's pop one of these out of here. This one looks pretty good. Come on out of there. Come on. There we go. So this is grown entirely in sphagnum moss, which is not a problem. It works really well. Just loosen it up a little bit though. Let's see what we got going on in here. As far as a rhizome. Well, there's the roots and everything. Yeah, it's just one rhizome. There's not really anything we can pull off of there. However, we can pull a couple of the bottom leaves off of there. And you just got to make sure when you pull the leaf that it actually comes down into the rhizome down there. So you just kind of pull that down. See how it takes the rhizome off with it? That's what we want. Okay, so we'll put that up there. This one pretty much came off too, so I'm going to take it. See, it goes all the way down. Those in there to keep those. Bottom leaves over here that might want to go. And this is a good way to get used to doing this kind of stuff, because these plants cost maybe $5, so you're not risking a $20 plant. That one there, I think we can do. I don't want to take more than 4 leaves off of any of these plants, but that one is being really stubborn. This side, however, there's a brand new one. I don't want to take that one. Oh, come on, man. nice. There we go. Oh, that even came with a little tiny bit of root. That one's definitely going to be a good one. The rest of this, we just want to leave. Okay, so pack a little more sphagnum back around that. And not use all of it though. I'm gonna put some of this stuff in there. Pack some of this in there with it. In there. These plant leaves that want to bend down. Get them up as much as we can. Don't want to bury any leaves. It doesn't like that. Okay. Get that down in there good. Use my forceps to kind of lift up. That pulls the whole plant out of there. I don't want to do that. Okay. Come on. Hopefully we didn't stress this out too much. Let's see how it does now. It's got a little more space to grow in. Okay, so that's Mr. Typical 1. Okay, this will be Typical 2. This one's got a few dead traps we're going to want to cut off. Come on. There we go. For this, we've got some Castroviejo surgical shears that look really good for this, to get these out of there. Let's get rid of that. Just the trap on that one. Scissors are actually fabulous for this kind of work. And you can use the forceps to pull the pieces out if you need to. That one, the trap is going pretty quick there. Go ahead and nip it off. Oh, there's something else there. There's another one that's not doing well. I've put a little link in for these tools. You gotta be careful because there's a lot of places that sell knockoffs, but I got these from a place that actually does surgical supply, and they work really good. Okay, we're gonna take a look at what we can divide or pull off of here. If you want to do a rhizome division, you got to make sure that there's two distinct bulbs and both have roots. This one actually seems to be that way. Looks like there's actually two plants in this one container. I don't know if you can see that, but they're separated right there, and both have roots. So if I can tease this out, we can actually put an entire second plant from this one. There we go. Get the traps untangled. So we got roots and everything. So this one we're not going to bother doing leaf poles. We are going to just poke a hole in here. Pop this whole bad boy in there. Just leave the roots down there. Oops. Not sure if that's actually a separate plant or if it's just the rhizome division, but it looks like it's actually two different plants. We've got some new traps coming up there. One we can snip off there. And then we can actually put some of this back in here. Here. Don't get it on these new ones that are coming up there either. I think all the new leaves are out still. Two division back in there. So this guy Okay. So that is my typical number 2. So you get the picture. We'll show you the results when we get done. Fast forward 6 months, and we're going to take a look at our Venus flytrap leaf poles to see how they propagated. But I want to touch base with the original mother plants and see how they did as well. All of these plants were in a plant light shootout, so each plant had a different plant grow light over it. Typical number 1 had a ECRU full spectrum plant light over it. It's done quite well. Looks like it might even be developing a second rosette in here. We'll wait to divide this until next spring because these plants didn't get a very long dormancy period after we ended the plant light shootout. It was only about 4 or 5 weeks before it got warm and they started growing again. So that's typical number 1. Typical number 2. This one was under a Rhizome full spectrum plant grow light. It's also got some nice big traps on it. Did pretty well. Number 3, it didn't do quite so well. Number 3 was underneath a Shanxite red-blue spectrum plant grow light. It had a lot of big traps that died off, and it hasn't really started kicking in yet for this growing season. So we'll keep an eye on that and see how well it does once we get it into natural light. Plant number 4 was underneath a Rhizome red-blue spectrum plant grow light. Did pretty well. It's got a lot of tinier traps along this side here, which I think are a second growth point that we can divide later. Plant number 5. This one is under the control lighting, which was just LED shop lights. Looks like it's done pretty well, and again, it got this first rosette, but it looks like it's also getting a second rosette toward the back of the plant. So now we go on to the leaf pulls. This is typical number 1 using sphagnum moss. We had 2. You can see them, just teeny tiny little plantlets here and here. But those are looking pretty healthy, and hopefully this spring we'll start throwing out some little bit bigger traps. Typical number 2 doesn't really count as a leaf pull. That rhizome actually had 2 separate growth points that we separated, but it's done pretty well. It's had some bigger traps that died off during the dormancy, so hopefully it'll come back with bigger traps again this spring. Typical number 3, we didn't get any growth. This one was in just peat moss with no sphagnum moss on top of it, and we didn't get any growth out of that at all. Here we have typical number 4. It's hard to see, but there is a tiny little plantlet right there. And again, that's sphagnum moss. We actually pulled a number of leaves off of number 5, so we used 2 pots, both of which had just the peat moss in them, and neither one of those took either. The leaves just rotted away and never sprouted. So just for comparison's sake, here's all 5 of our leaf pulls. I don't know if it's just a coincidence that the sphagnum moss had success where the peat moss didn't. I've seen people suggest doing it both ways. This certainly isn't a scientific study, it's too small of a sample to make any definitive claims. But I think next time I will use more sphagnum moss for my leaf pulls. I'll just try 1 or 2 in peat moss and see how we do then. If you found this video helpful, please hit the like button. If you want to see more, hit the subscribe button and hit the bell icon if you want to be notified when we post new videos. Thanks for watching.